In this video, I'm going to show you how to plan and prepare for a successful backpacking trip. Let's go! One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Dwight D. Eisenhower, and that is, "Planning is essential, but plans are useless." And this applies so perfectly to backpacking because having a good plan is so important to having a successful trip. However, as soon as you get out in the woods, something always goes haywire and your plan has to get tossed aside and you've got to be able to adapt on the fly. I really enjoy the planning and preparing aspects of backpacking. I take a fairly organized approach, and I'm going to share with you the things that I do to plan and prepare for each trip. Documenting your plan is important, and to that end, I've created a simple 2-page planning worksheet that you can download and use to plan your next trip. We'll be filling it out as we go in this video, and I've included a link in the description so you can download it for yourself. Simply click on the link, download the PDF, and save it to your computer for use on your own trips. The first section of the worksheet is to be used to figure out where you're going to hike. If you already know where you're going to hike, then simply skip ahead to the timestamp shown below. In the trip length section, this is where we're going to document how many days and nights we want to hike. If this is your first trip, I think probably 1 night, maybe 2 is sufficient. Then figure out how many average daily miles you want to hike. This is going to vary widely from person to person. One person may think 8 miles is just the longest distance in the world and they can't even do it. And another person may have that done by 9 a.m. There's so many different factors that go into it. Your experience, your fitness level, the weather, the terrain, the time of year, all those different factors weigh in. If you're not sure, my recommendation is to go a little bit lower on the mileage. Next, write down the region in which you'd like to hike. That could be somewhere in Texas, or in the Midwest, or within an hour drive of my house. This will help you narrow down the places for which you're going to be able to hike. The next step is to find a trail. And there's a wiki page that shows all of the long distance trails in the United States. And this is a great place to start. Look at all these trails. So many trails, so little time. In addition, you can also do Google searches in the general area you've chosen for your trip and find all kinds of different options that way. For purposes of this video, I'm going to fill out this form as if I'm planning a trip to Wyoming and that I'd like to hike in the Grand Tetons area. Once you have your trail officially selected, it's time to start looking up all the different unique considerations that you need to think about for your trip. In the first section, think about what kind of animals are present that you need to be aware of. Snakes, bears, raccoons, hordes of insects. All of these different things can present challenges that, if you're not prepared for them, can be a real problem. For example, there's one area I heard where the deer were eating the handles off of people's trekking poles or the wrist straps, and they were tasting the salt, and then they would just chew them off. So you had to know, if you're in that area, put your trekking poles up out of reach where the deer can't get them. In other areas, bugs can be a real menace, so you may need to treat your clothes with permethrin or have a bug net with you to keep them off of you while you're trying to eat and hike. For my trip to the Tetons, it's important to note that grizzly bears, although uncommon, are present, and it's a good idea to carry bear spray. The next section is where you can write down any rules around having campfires. Now, if you're not going to have a campfire at all and you know that, you can just skip this section. However, if you do like campfires, just be aware that rules and regulations are changing and getting a little bit more strict over time. More and more places are not allowing campfires, or they're restricting when and how you can have a campfire. In some areas, like in California, you have to have a special permit before you can have a campfire or even use a camp stove with a flame. What's really important is that you understand the rules so you can avoid getting a ticket, or even worse, causing some kind of an environmental catastrophe. In the next section, you can write down any other special rules or regulations that apply to the area in which you'll be backpacking. Examples include required use of a bear canister, rules on where you are supposed to place your bear canister in terms of like how far away from your tent, required use of crampons or an ice axe in snowy times. Some places require you to carry out your toilet paper, and there's usually rules and regulations around how far you're required to camp from streams and the trail itself. These are just a few examples, and in my opinion, it's the responsibility of every backpacker to understand the rules and to comply. Now is when the real fun starts, which is figuring out all of your trip logistics. This can be a little bit of work, but having all this information documented and written down can be quite helpful. Let's start out by figuring out our starting and ending trailheads. You need to figure out where you're going to start your hike and where you're going to end your hike. You also need to figure out how you're going to get to and from your vehicle. The bottom line is you need to know where you're starting, know where you're ending, and knowing how you're getting to and from your vehicles at these points. The next section is pretty simple. Just select whether you're going to fly or drive to your spot. If you're going to fly, clearly you're going to need to arrange some kind of a shuttle to the trailhead. Most large trails have some sort of a trail association website, and there are usually shuttles available on the larger trails, so use these if you can. Otherwise, Uber is sometimes a possibility, although in more remote areas it can be a lot more difficult, especially with pickup, because most places in the middle of nowhere don't have any cellular service and you need that to be able to use the app. The next two sections are for you to fill out what you need in terms of reservations and permits. For example, you may need a reservation to camp in certain spots. There are a couple of places I've been recently where you need no permit at all to be in the area, but you do need a reservation to be able to camp at one of the designated campsites. So write that information down here in terms of reservations. For the next section, let's talk about required permits. This is where you're going to want to research what type of permit you need to hike in your section. For example, on the John Muir Trail, you need to apply for a permit 168 days ahead of when you plan to start your hike. And it's also a lottery system, so not everybody gets one. For other trails, it's a lot more simple. Maybe you just sign up for a permit at a kiosk when you get there, and other trails need no permit at all. The main point is you should figure out what's required and write it down here so you know what you need to get. The next section for notes on camping I think is very important. You really should have a good idea of where you're going to stay each night. On some trails there are actual campgrounds along the trail that you can camp on. On others, there are designated camping zones for you to camp in, and in others, dispersed camping is allowed. What's important is that you have a good idea of where you're going to stay each night. I've seen uncertainty over the camping situation hurt the morale of a group, so having a good plan ahead of time can help you avoid mutiny on the trail. Water, water, water. The most important thing you can have with you. You can't survive without water, and it's critically important that you understand what the water situation is on the trail, where you're going to get it, and it can vary widely from trail to trail, and even within a specific trail, it can vary a lot. On some trails, there's water everywhere, and you never need to carry more than a liter, and you're just fine. On other trails, there can be 10 or 20 mile plus stretches with no water at all, and you have to carry several liters just to be able to make it from one point to the other. I've also included a section for resupply notes. Now, the actual process of resupplying is way beyond the scope of what I wanted to include in this video, but I did include a section of it on the worksheet so you can fill out anything you need to on how you're going to do your resupplies for your trip. The next section is where you can document any adjustments to your standard gear list. I'm assuming that you have some kind of a spreadsheet or a document that lists all the items that you need to take with you on a backpacking trip, and you can include any additions or subtractions to that list in this section. For example, if you're hiking in an area with no bears, you don't have to include your bear canister. Or if you're hiking in an area where it's very, very warm, maybe you don't need to include your stocking cap and gloves. If you're hiking deep in the backcountry by yourself, maybe you want to have a Garmin InReach or a spot device like that to take with you. The main point is the gear that you take with you is probably going to vary a little bit from trip to trip, and this section here can help you keep track of what you really need to bring on the one that you're going on. One thing I always look up when I'm going to a backpacking area is what is the average high and average low temperature for that time of year at that spot. I also like to look up what is the record high and record low temperature in a particular area. This is helpful because if the record low is 47 degrees, then there's really no need to bring a 20-degree quilt. And you can probably save yourself a little weight that way and be more comfortable as well. So check out the temperatures and just make sure that you have the right gear for the conditions that you're going to be hiking in. The last section is just a checkbox for you to check off when you've got the maps that you need downloaded and printed. When I'm going on a trip, I will take a physical map, I'll take a picture of the physical map and keep that on my phone, and then I will also have some kind of an app like Guthook, an electronic way with GPS on it to help understand where I'm at on the trail. Now, I know this sounds like overkill, but I certainly don't want to be caught out on the trail with no map. As far as where to get the maps, generally if there's a trail association, they'll have maps on the website. In addition, you can usually buy maps for the well-known trails on websites like Amazon. When I'm in the trip planning process, I actually use this document to keep notes on all the different things that we discussed. I create a day-by-day itinerary, and I leave that along with a map with the route highlighted with my wife, just in case. I also write down important phone numbers such as shuttle services, park headquarters, or campgrounds that I'll be staying at, and I take that with me. I also keep a to-do list throughout the planning process, so I keep track of everything I have to do to get ready for the trip. Here's an example of what one of my to-do lists might look like. Once it's actually time to go on the trip, finally, what I call go time, this is what I do. 2 days prior to my trip, I print my gear list and I start pulling all my stuff together. I get things out one by one and put it in a big pile in the living room. And I check it off the list once it's in the pile. Then I double check the list before packing everything in my pack. Before walking out the door on the day I'm leaving for the hike, I do one last scan of my gear list just to make 100% sure I haven't left anything at home. This just helps ensure that I haven't forgotten anything in the rush to get out the door on the day of the trip. As you can see, properly planning for a backpacking trip can be quite a bit of work. However, if you do it properly, you can hike confidently knowing that you're well prepared for your trip. As always, if you found any value in this video, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks, and we'll see you on the trail.